I'm Sue Johnson from Navish, but I'm going to be handing quite swiftly over to my colleague Carolyn in a moment. Just to let you know, we've had to change up quite considerably what we were going to do this afternoon. So what we've decided is that Carolyn's done sort of a full rewrite. So it's going to be more of a presentation, but should be really, lots of good stuff. Carolyn's done some brilliant work within Liverpool and across the virtual head population, really. We're really working on this agenda. And then we will try and get a bit of Q&A. There'll be a bit of roving mic going on towards the end. So sit back, enjoy Carolyn's presentation, and then we'll speak to you all after.
Hi everyone. Sorry, we've had to make some last minute changes and I'm also really conscious of time. Can everyone hear and understand me okay? Because just like Frank, I'm a Scouser and it's not always easy. What we're going to try and do today, oh, there's the oofa doofa. I call it an oofa doofa, sorry, there we go, Scout straight away. These are the kinds of aims for this workshop session. It's not really a workshop, I suppose, because of the way we've set out. We can't really interact as much as we'd like, so we'll do it through Roman mics. We're going to think a brief introduction to attachment and trauma responsive care within education settings, why it's important and what it looks like. We're going to have some discussion, so I'll share a little bit of practice from Liverpool and hopefully we'll get to hear different practice and ideas and things that work from yourselves. And then at the end, we're going to make our pledges and ensure that they're stuck to that tree at the side. So, right. So, keeping young people close and protecting their well-being from education. Schools continue to represent the most robust protective factor for our young people in all the research and all the data, and that's largely because the majority of our young people's time in the day through the week is spent at school, in theory. Emotional-based school avoidance, which relates to what Frank is saying, has gone up 161% post-pandemic. And non-attendance, so complete non-attendance, has gone up by 67%. And exclusions and suspensions from schools are on the rise. Access to specialist services is really difficult for young people because the specialist services are overwhelmed and stretched, and you find that their thresholds are quite high. So, or when they eventually do get their appointments, young people find it really difficult to go and engage and talk about those difficult things. So non-engagement means that, you're back on the waiting list and we go for the next one. So 25 to 40% of cases for schools are referred back to schools for the support. The impact of not being in school exacerbates the threat response system and needs for young people. So they're missing peer opportunities, they're missing out learning. And that's got a long life impact, feeling isolated, social isolation. It increases stress within the family. So this isn't I know we're talking about children in care, but this applies to all children. There are so many families whose children have special educational needs who haven't been able to go back after the pandemic. There's families where children are finding school overwhelming for multiple reasons and then are not able to go to school and they're finding it difficult, and then the parents are choosing to home educate, or working parents are then having to give up jobs to be at home. We talk about this sometimes in our network sessions in Liverpool with the teachers, because I go back to, I'm in my 40s, but I go back to when I was a child, and if I didn't go to school, I didn't interact with people because we had the phone that was plugged into the wall downstairs, we had 4 channels on the telly, and if you didn't go to school, you didn't get to see your friends. Whereas now we're living in a society where there's my friend on the end of the phone, I'm in my bedroom, there's my friend on my computer, on my Xbox. So their interactions have changed as well, and I wonder what impact that's had. And then the challenge of keeping young people in the school community and connected to the sources of support that's wrapped around a school community does actually create a lot of protection. And then I think things that we haven't really discussed as a nation is staff well-being, retention and burnout. So during the pandemic, when lots of people were put on furlough, and it was the public sector, it was schools, it was the frontline workers trying to support, and schools became these real hubs of community support where families would go to for food, for help. They were distributing food vouchers, they were safeguarding young people, they were trying to educate online and being creative. And then when everything returned, it was straight away back to what you were expected to do, deliver your normal lessons and your normal curriculum, and there's the hoop, and we haven't altered it, and we're still going to jump those kids who've had that disruption through there. So it's creating an awful lot of pressure on teachers, pressure on young people, and it's like a pressure cooker pot. And then this is what we've got. And so I think that's why we've got staff burnout, people walking away from the profession because they're like, I just can't do this anymore. So we need to really think how we support professionals on the front line. So the key principles, the UK government has a number of legal frameworks in place to support children's mental health in schools, which includes the Mental Health Acts of 1983 and 2007, which guides how mental health needs are assessed and treated, especially for young people. The Children's Act 1989 sets out the duty to safeguard children's welfare, including their emotional well-being, and the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill, which has just been read through Parliament, focuses specifically on improving well-being in educational settings. Alongside these laws, there are also really important national initiatives. So the Department for Education provides guidance on creating mentally healthy schools, and mental health support teams are being rolled out in schools to offer direct help to them. And many schools also now have designated mental health leads, although not all have, but many of them do. All schools should have SENCOs, and where needed, there are education, health and care plans to coordinate and personalise support for young people with the greatest need. And this ensures mental health is not seen as separate, but a vital part of the overall development of the child. Trying not to, right, so, two buttons going. So estimated costs. So the reason I'm bringing up the topic of exclusions is because when young people really struggle in school with their emotional regulation, that's often displayed as behavioural outbursts or what people will call challenging behaviour, challenging to them, the young people, you know. So what the result is, the burnout of the staff, the lack of skill, the lack of understanding that, oh, I've got a whole class and you're disrupting it. It leads to exclusions and suspensions. The immediate costs of an exclusion work out around £63,000 per young person per year, and that is a child who is not in care. If you then take into account for a young person who is in care, sometimes, you know, a permanent exclusion can cost them the roof over their head, and a placement can be ended because we can't manage this anymore, blah, 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 blah. And so that cost is then dramatically increased. So when we're looking at these costs here, if you add a couple of £100,000 on, that's where you're looking at for care experienced young people. And that's, I think, you know, a huge argument to why we need to change this. So the key concepts for trauma-informed practice in schools. Understanding the impact of developmental trauma is essential for all school staff, not just teachers or the mental health lead or the SENCO. Every single member of staff, down to your ancillary staff, your lunchtime supervisors, the receptionist on the front door, every member of staff needs training because it helps everyone to interpret and understand behaviour through a lens of compassion rather than punishment or judgment. And that goes for when, obviously, receptionists are dealing with adults coming through the door. We need to be giving everybody these skills. It creates a safer and more responsive environment where children will feel seen, supported and ready to learn, and the same for their families. When all staff share the understanding, it builds consistency, reduces re-traumatisation and strengthens relationships across the whole community. A whole school approach ensures that every adult, regardless of their role, contributes to a consistent, supportive environment for children affected by trauma. It embeds shared values, language, and strategies across policies, practice, and the whole culture of the school. And it reduces mixed messages and fragmented responses. And what I mean by that is, like, sometimes support staff don't feel as confident to deal with the situation. They might ask the teacher to intervene. The teacher will intervene in a different way. The children then sometimes react to the support member of staff with less respect and so on. And if we have a consistent approach and method and understanding, it really strengthens that unity. This unified approach benefits not only the vulnerable pupils, but also promotes staff wellbeing and strengthens the entire school community. This approach helps staff recognise between themselves when someone's at their stress point, and it's like maybe not best for you to intervene in the situation. Maybe you need to go and have 5 minutes and I'll support you, and you find that happens. Psychologically responsive care is a phrase I prefer to use than trauma-informed practice, because that's what we're talking about. In schools, this means understanding and responding to children's behaviour through the lens of their emotional and developmental needs. It involves creating safe, predictable environments and using relationships as a key tool for regulation, learning and growth. And this approach values connection over correction, helping staff to respond with empathy, consistency and curiosity rather than control or judgment. And then the last one on that I've put is attachment. So secure attachments are trusted key adults will provide young people with a sense of safety, belonging and stability, and it's especially vital for those who have experienced disrupted attachment, trauma or loss. These relationships help regulate emotions, build resilience and support healthy brain development. When young people feel consistently seen and heard and valued by a key adult, they are more able to engage in learning and form positive connections with others. So this is the rationale. So I've kind of put down the educational argument for why attachment-aware, trauma-informed, psychologically responsive schools are better. So the educational argument, you can see yourself, adverse experiences impact on educational pathways and outcomes, and it shows you that in research, and we know that our young people not in education, employment and training, that's higher percentages. And there's growing evidence that this approach in practice in schools increases engagement, improves well-being, not just of young people, but staff, and reduces the number of sanctions and has stronger learning outcomes. And that's from the University of Oxford and niche research. I'll share some of our work in a minute. I'll share some of little data we've collected over the last few years. The therapeutic argument, schools represent a natural social system, and so they're one of the consistent places in a child's life. That makes them a natural place to promote recovery. Think about the rule of 168. There are 160 hours in a week, and if we're thinking about young people who need access to specialist mental health service, even when they eventually do go there, and if they are able to engage at that point, we're talking 1 out of 168 hours a week. That's not going to be a long, and it might be 8 sessions. It's not going to be a long term. Whereas when you're in school, 41.6, the minimum is 41.6% of your time, your 168 hours is spent in the school building. So if you've got those consistent and persistent key adults allowing you to make mistakes, supporting you to repair them, use a natural consequence. If this happens, well, if you make a mess, you're going to clean it up, and then we're going to talk about how that happens and what we can do, and I'm simplifying things there. But it's really emphasising that therapeutic day-to-day interaction is the most healing thing for all young people, especially our children in care. Never giving up. Too easy to say, off your trot, you're suspended, you're not my problem. It is all our problem, they're our kids. So just a little, I've got some Roman mics, I think. Little question, just turn to the people next to you, and then as soon as you've kind of got something, throw your hands up, because we're really short on time. But the question is, can anyone here relate to any of that? And have you seen a shift if you know that a trauma-informed approach is being used? Have you seen a shift in anything? So if anyone's got anything, you can share, either throw your hand up or... Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Victoria Banks. I'm the virtual school head for Middlesbrough. And we know that a holistic education approach for care experienced young people, those on the edge of care, gives the best outcomes for those children. And we have been working on a project called Proclaim, which is an attachment-aware trauma-informed project, and we're trying to make it town-wide, so you have that whole system approach. We have now been doing it for 4 years, and there are some really interesting data that's coming out of it. I think one of the things around having a holistic education approach is around that mind, body, spirit. And when we're trying to teach our young people, we go straight for the mind. And it's that thing of the expectation is that they come into school and they are ready to learn. And that's an unrealistic expectation. I don't come into work every day ready to do work sometimes. I've had a really difficult day. Sometimes I need some support from my colleagues, and they do that for me naturally, but we don't always do that for children within education. And part of the relational approach that we've been using is empowering staff in schools to say it's okay not to be okay, and it's also okay for the children not to be okay. And one of the first things that we need to do is to connect with the spirit of our young people and say to them, you know, inspire them to learn. They want to learn. Naturally, as human beings, how we develop is having that natural curiosity about learning. How do we do things better? How do we change things quicker, faster? And we want to do that. So how do we nurture that spirit in our children? The second thing is that we need to go for the body. If our children and young people and our staff within the school settings are focusing on their felt safety, both physically and psychological safety, they are not in a space where they can learn. Biologically, they're not in a space where they can learn, and it is not fair to expect our young people to be able to sit and learn maths when they're sitting thinking, am I safe in this room? So what we need to do is empower staff, first to look after themselves, and that's what Headteacher trauma-informed and relational-based practice does. Is the first thing that you need to do is look after yourself. So within the Proclaim project, we use the swim webs for mental health and wellbeing. And by giving them the tools to be Headteacher-aware, trauma-informed, relational, understand what they need to do in order to heal themselves and be prepared for the day, we found on 90% of those measures, there was a 10% increase for all of our schools. Staff retention is higher. Staff are reporting that they are happier and feel more equipped in the classroom. As a direct result of that, what we have found is suspensions have reduced for all schools who are Proclaim schools. Attendance has increased for all of those schools year on year, and it's getting better. And Middlesbrough is on the backdrop of we have one of the poorest wards in the country. Poverty and deprivation is huge in Middlesbrough, and people live with that every day. So suspensions and exclusions are really high. But if you're in a Proclaim school, you're 3 times less likely to be suspended. And that just shows the power of having relational practice in schools, and that we can do things differently and we can change, and it does make a huge impact. And I found my colleagues in schools have been really brave in taking that on, because it is a huge shift to say you're on this journey with us, or you can't be part of our school from a staff perspective. So yeah, we've seen some real huge impact from relational practice.
Thanks very much. Just going to move on because of time, and there is other little opportunities, sorry. So then the rationale as well, from the public health point of view, is that children don't come in parts, they come as a whole person, and we can't separate their mental health, their education, and their lived experiences. It's one package, and like everybody said, the system needs to work together. We can't rely solely on mental health services alone to fix everything. It gets too big and it's too late by the time it reaches the crisis point. We need it to be right at the beginning. We need to respond earlier and everywhere with a collective whole society response. And it's also about equity. Outcomes for our children in the most vulnerable contexts are disproportionately poor, particularly young people. I know we're talking a lot about care experience, but particularly those on child protection. When you're looking at their attendance figures compared to children looked after, they are really, really shockingly different. And if we believe truly in social justice, then our schools must be part of this solution. So, this is a quote I love, except the oofa-doofa's not working. So when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So for our schools, it's not about you come to our school, you don't do what we want you to do or work with our rules, so you don't belong to our school. We need to adapt what we're doing. We need to change to meet the needs of that young person. So you can turn to the person next to you and throw your hands up as soon as you've got something. The question for you is, what is one part of the environment you could influence? You've got one on the front. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Laura Dennis and I'm from the Mulberry Bush in Oxfordshire. Over the past 4 years, I've been supporting 9 Oxfordshire primary schools to embed traditional nurture groups within their schools, which means that we've been specifically targeting children with social, emotional, mental health needs to be able to manage the day-to-day life in a mainstream school. And quite often we've had children from the care system within these settings, and I've been able to train up the staff alongside Nurture UK to be able to deliver a really clever practice and piece of provision, but we've specifically targeted Key Stage 1 because we've gone for the early intervention, because our hope is, and from the research that we've collated so far, is that actually by the time they get to Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, because they've had this early provision, they are then stopping, hopefully, their chances of being the children who are suspended or permanently excluded or non-attending school because they've had that early support in the nurture spaces. And when I talk about environment specifically, the physicality, I always say to the adult teams that I'm training, when you go to write an assignment, where do you sit? What do you wear? Do you make sure you've got a cup of tea? What's your lighting like? Do you have your headphones in? Do we think like that when we're working with the children in our classrooms? Because I can tell you now, we absolutely quite often don't. They sit on hard plastic chairs for 60, some schools are doing an hour and a half lessons now, where children have to sit for 90 minutes on plastic chairs in a very uncomfortable situation. So there's no wonder that we have seen a rise in, things like suspensions and things and behaviour.
And if you think about how regulating movement is as adults in the work setting, if we need to get up and walk, we will. If we need to go to the toilet, we will. We're not disrupting what's going on in our environment. And we are, as educators, preparing our children for adulthood. So why are we making everything so rigid? Particularly, we're talking year 1 there. Why have we got year 1 sitting at tables? Where's the play-based curriculum? And why does the play-based curriculum stop at early years? Why haven't we got play-based curriculums in Key Stage 3 and 4? Or, why are we stopping our young people playing? Thanks for that. I'm going to whip through the next 3. So, framework for practice. I'm not going to read that to you, but it's a collaborative approach, so it involves everybody. It's a shared understanding, it's a whole school culture shift. It's not bringing this fantastic trainer for a couple of sessions of staff CPD, but the caretaker was off that time on annual leave and someone was sick, so they didn't get that training. And then we do that and it's done, and we've got a badge on the wall to say we're trauma informed. That's not how it works. It's a complete day-to-day challenging of each other, ourselves, how we respond to young people. It promotes staff support and relationships between staff in schools and psychologically informed. So what does it look like? It's not a curriculum, it's a culture. Everyone realises the impact of trauma, recognises the signs of this in children and young people. There's been lots of work done around adverse childhood experiences, I would say. The majority of people have an excellent understanding. And staff and school community are able to understand the impact on this on behaviour. They're able to take a developmental perspective and recognise the impact thinking about a child's unmet needs, and to differentiate biologically and relationally. Victoria mentioned that before. They're relationally informed. They recognise the impact of disrupted attachments and that trauma, and that the children who have experienced this in their relationships need that stability and that ability to build those bonds with other people, like what Frank was saying. Central to recovery is the quality of relationships that children have in school. It's not a standardised intervention because it's really difficult to measure. Researchers often like things to be standardised. We do this and that's the result. Whereas this approach is so multi-layered, which we'll come on to in a minute, it's harder to measure and compare. There's a distinction between trauma-specific intervention and trauma-responsive and caring approaches. And this is about a systemic and organisational approach, not standalone interventions. It's rather a framework to guide systems that can include specific interventions, but just them on their own aren't sufficient. This is my favourite one. Except I haven't turned the slides. I'm turning on this screen and not this one. It gets messy. this is really difficult stuff. We're talking about us as humans first, professionals second, and like Victoria and other people have said, you've really got to be very self-aware and very in the space of your own emotions and recognising your own emotional responses to be able to respond appropriately to young people and consistently. It's supposed to be messy. Humans are messy. So I love that quote. So just a short piece. I've got some slides to show you about a project I did in Liverpool called the Heart Project. And it's very, very like the Proclaim project in Middlesbrough or the Belong project in Trafford. In 2020, prior to the pandemic, and I've been virtual head in Liverpool since 2018, I was getting a lot of phone calls off head teachers, and they were like, if you don't move this child, I'm going to exclude them. And for some of our more dysregulated or young people in care who were finding things really difficult, the head teachers have to be like, they need a space in Hope School, Hope Specialist School, because at that point, Hope were operating an intervention space as well as the specialist provision. And I kind of got a bit sick of the conversation because I'd come out of 20 years of classroom teaching and leadership and so on in a primary, and I was like, these are primary teachers saying they can't manage a 6-year-old. And it can be done, but what's going on? So I got curious. I went down to visit Hope and met Rowett, and Maxine, Rowett was then the head, and Maxine, who's the current head, but she was the deputy at the time. And I was like, I'm getting a bit fed up with they need to go to Hope. They don't. They need to change what they're doing. And I know they'll come to visit you for a day and they'll do some work, and because the school were doing workshops and supporting them with trauma-informed practice. And we were having people like, fabulous Jenny Knock and some fantastic, really strong trainers going out to the schools, but it just wasn't translating into practice. So we need to do something different. So we decided, we mocked up this project with 10 schools, 7 primary, 3 secondary, and this was the pilot. And the aim was to build the capacity to address it in schools, stop pushing our children into specialist provisions or moving them out, change what you do. So I've basically just told you what that was all why. We'll skip that one over. So the model we took was from the research that the Rees Centre in Oxford University had done. It's called the Hadley Trust model, and I'm sure, Victoria, you used the same model. So nationally, there'd been lots of research on what was working across virtual schools. There was a big piece of research, and then it was brought together in this document. And this document here, the hexagons, they kind of have all the components on what works well. So what we wanted to try and include in the project is everything. So it was like, right, we're going to be really brave here and do something really different. So these are the core elements of Heart. So first one, and the most important, is commitment. So the schools have to, I don't go to the schools and say, you need to be a Heart school, although I'd love to for lots of them. They have to be ready. It has to take the commitment of the leaders in the school to want to drive and shift the change. So the schools actually complete an application and an expression of interest. We were only taking 10 in the first pilot, 23 applied, so we still only took 10. And some of those, we made it really clear that the head teacher creates the culture of the school, has to be involved in the project. So a lot of the head teachers in the pilot group put themselves down as the project lead, which at that point they were doing a PG cert in attachment and trauma alongside the project. So it was quite a big piece. We've made some adaptations since then. What we've found over we're in 2025, over the 4.5 years we've done this, is when the head teacher isn't actively engaged, it doesn't translate or it doesn't last. So we've now changed the project in the last cohort. If the head teacher is not a project lead, sorry, you're not on the project. Element 2 is the high quality training and professional development. Initially we worked with the University of Chester, but we found that it was fantastic, the course they offered. It was PG cert, but for school leaders it was a lot to ask. We made some adaptations, and what we've done since over the years, we've now developed our own content. We know what reading and know what reflection needs to. We don't necessarily want it masters accredited. It is accredited by psychologically responsive leadership through changing minds. So they undertake accredited training. Every school has 2 project leads. And then the job of the project lead is to actually recognise and deliver the training to their staff. They become responsible on seeing the gaps and really supporting that. So the Heart project team don't deliver to the whole school. We deliver to the project leads, and their responsibility is then to organise that. And whatever, it might be an external provider they use, it's down to their school. Element 3 is the network and community, and this is where the golden stuff happens. So the project leads come together in the network sessions, and it's kind of like a bit like group supervision and problem solving. So we'll have themes that run through it, and it often comes from, it's not a top-down approach, this is a peer-led model. So when we go round, we usually start with a check-in. It's like, how's things going? And they might want to share something that's gone really well or that's been challenging, or they'll present, and bearing in mind these are head teachers being their most vulnerable professional selves. This incident happened with this child in my school. This is how some of my staff responded. This then happened with the parents. It's all got a bit messy, and I think I could have done that better, or I'm really stuck. And then we'll ask the group to give them a solution, talk to, and we'll come up with 10 solutions to try. So it's really getting that conversation going, and because there's a community and a safe space where people are saying, do you know what, I got that wrong, it allows them to say, you know, we got it wrong. I'll stand there as a virtual head and say, probably didn't deal with that quite the way I should have, and that professional vulnerability is magic and really empowering. And also those heads will often interact outside of the network group because they know where support and peers are. Element 4, which connects really to element 2 as well, is individual school audit and development planning. So we go out with our now Heart audit, and we'll have a conversation. It's not an Ofsted inspection, it's not a big piece of work. We'll have a conversation and we'll reflect on each of the elements, as in we're talking about holistic practice. So is every member of your staff trained, or is it just the teaching staff? 99.9% of the time it's solely the teachers. There might be the odd times where, you know, support assistants have been in, but very rarely is Mrs. Jones, who's the front door lady in the office, been to any training. So that's a real quick shift really usually, and we go through different elements. From that, we then identify with the schools quite easily using the tool the areas they need to think about to develop next. And we keep saying to them, it's not a race, it's not a sprint, we don't do it all at once, it's a marathon. You've got to change it solidly. Slow and steady wins the race. So they look at it, sometimes it's a quick win right from going on. The quick win is all staff are coming to training, great, that one's kind of solved. But then it's like, we're going to pick one area, and we're going to really hone in on that area for the next 12 months and really measure the change in the drive. And the audit and the development tool helps us to do that. Using the Pupil Premium Plus funding, that virtual heads get some of the central funding, I provide psychological support for the schools from not educational psychologists, clinical psychologists. It baffles me that educators on the front line don't receive supervision like NHS and social care do. And providing that safe space for people to talk about things that might be personal to them, that's triggering them, or providing that space for them to go, do you know what, this is happening in my classroom and I'm really stuck, and in fact, because that's where the stress and the triggers and the responses change. How else can I deal with it? That's used quite creatively. In some cases, in one school in particular, they had a particularly tricky year group, and there was a kind of 6 or 7 young people who were kind of like, you know, the ones you don't want by each other, and they all kind of gravitate and then everything happens. So they used it really creatively. They worked with the leaders, they did whole school sessions and then sessions with various groups of staff. And just by shifting the thinking and understanding those young people and their responses better through a clinical psychology, like a thinking lens, it changed everything. But nothing had changed other than the fact people had slowed down and looked in a different way. So they were able to manage the responses better and support each other. So that's absolutely such a golden thread. Pupil voice, of course, this probably should be element 1. Young people at the centre of all we do. So we've got a young persons reference group, and we place the emphasis of this. So even when we wrote the framework with the pilot group, co-wrote it, young people created some of the language. I'll share a little bit of that with you in a minute, which is obviously element 7. So HEART is an acronym, and it stands for Holistic Thinking, Empowering the School Community, Aspirations for Every Pupil, relational focus, trust and safety, and a shared purpose. I know that's really tiny writing. So that's the framework, and each of those sections, through the network sessions, through the work we've done with the young people, reference group, I didn't write this, our clinical psych didn't write this, the head teacher of Hope School, who's the network lead, did not write this. This is completely co-produced. And at any time it could change if we decide we want to change the language. I'm just going to do that so you can see, for example, the letter H. So H is holistic thinking. What we mean is we focus on the whole child, thinking holistically about their developmental needs, using psychological formulation to better understand them and their story, their strengths and their needs. It's a strength-based approach. And I absolutely love this bit in the H, because this was highlighted as one of the things that the young people felt really strongly about. And that was most important. We had a session, and the question they were asked was, what makes you feel safe and happy in school? And they were talking about, none of them mentioned maths or English, which was bizarre. They talked about things like being with the friends at lunchtime, joining the sports club, music. One of the secondary young ladies in year 9 was like, in primary, we used to have all equipment out and skipping ropes, and we play games, and the staff would play with us, and we got to secondary and it's just concrete. And I was like, so what are you going to do about it then? And she was like, I said, well, go and speak to your head teacher. If you want skipping ropes and you want games, ask her. And so she did. And so they started to give the young people in the secondary school some equipment. And, you know, straight away, there's people in the room probably, or educators going, oh my God, secondary kids are skipping ropes. They're going to tie each other off and hurt each other. No, they'd use them properly. It was fun. So, you know, we've got to let young people be young people. But the conversation carried on the table, and this particular young person was like, you know, also in the classroom, it's always the same people that get heard, those that will speak up and shout out, and you know, it really, our teachers need to make sure everyone gets a chance. And one of the girls just went, no, I never want to speak in class. And the young person on the table was like, oh yeah, you're shy, aren't you? She was like, yeah, I've got a timeout pass. This young person had autism. And she was like, oh yeah, and she said, I said, so what are you trying to say? And she said, well, the teacher knows she's got a pass. I was like, so what are you trying to say? And she was like, well, they just need to know us. If they know who we are and they know what we need, then... And I just thought that captures the whole of holistic thinking in 2 words, know us. Too often for our young people, their stories aren't carried, particularly in secondary when they're going from class to subject to subject. Do we know our children's history? Do we carry their story without them having to retell it? And how do we embrace who they are and bring our strengths to that? So, yeah, so the framework works. I'm not going to play the videos, but we actually submitted some of the data in the interest. We won the gold award from the Pearson National Teaching Awards, which was quite an experience. And we also last year received the Alex Timpson Awards for the collaborative category. And I think what I'm most proud of here, this is not about what the virtual school's done or what Hope School's done. It's true peer-led collaboration. Like the whole summit has said, the answers to the problems aren't in the government policies and laws waiting to be written. They're in this room with the love and the compassion and everything that every individual brings. We can do it. We are the system. So we've got like 6 minutes, I'm really sorry. But this was the conversation I wanted to kind of have you to have with the people around you, and it might be just, you can do that quickly and offer some contributions while it's happening. But what would help professionals feel more confident when working with children who've experienced trauma? Things to think about, what hasn't worked in your settings when supporting children with emotional vulnerabilities and why? What common mistakes do we keep making when it comes to trauma-responsive practice? And where have you seen positive change? What was it that made it work? So there's your little conversation. We've got literally, you can have 3 minutes and then we'll be able to take a couple of contributions back if that's okay. So I think this lady, sorry, I don't know your name, this lady's got a contribution. Here we go. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? I've been wanting to say a few things all the way along.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. Can I just bring up a couple of things that you've mentioned, which are I think today's been so impactful for me because I work with young people with using my Next Gen Launchpad program, but I work, and the work I've done with, say, after COVID with Year 9s, I mean, unfortunately, they were labelled COVID kids, which I think is a sad label, but at the same time, it recognised the fact that young people were so behind in their social skills, their confidence levels had gone down, and they were struggling emotionally, socially, in so many different ways. And I think then you've touched on it already today, how young people, the teachers then are struggling, because they were having to cope with that. So it was in response to your question earlier on about what can we do to support. I think it's not the criticism, and it's not fixing the child or fixing the teacher or fixing the education system, but creating more support and some more knowledge. So that was one of my first points.
Brilliant point.
And the second point was actually about psychological safety. So I do work on inclusivity and helping building confidence through communication and collaborative communication and inclusive communication. And I think that the problem where you have when children are facing trauma or have faced trauma, especially bullying, which again escalated as a result of COVID, what ends up happening is that the children, especially when there's been trauma, they're not feeling safe. They're not feeling, and also because children, as we've heard today, are not actually feeling as if they're seen as different, and they're stigmatized, etc. They therefore feel that they are different. They're actually having to work against the labels and against the stigma, and so they don't feel safe to contribute. And when you look at psychological safety, you've got to have the inclusion first.
Absolutely.
And acceptance, and you've then got to lead on to all of the different stages of psychological safety. So I just wanted to make the point that when it comes to talking about trauma and getting schools and organisations more trauma-informed, I think we also need to think about creating that psychological safety as a sort of a parachute.
That's one of the core principles in this project, because what I think the biggest thing is the teacher standards, you know, your professional behaviour and so on, and teachers are the masters of acting and masking. You know, the car's fell to pieces,
Yes.
Someone's left you, the dog's dead, whatever, and you come to school and you stand in front of the class and it's like, right, it's Spanish, year 9, let's go.
Yeah.
What SDS, whatever. I'm not a Spanish teacher in case you can't tell. But then they're there performing, so they're not actually dealing with their own emotions, and they're not psychologically safe. So when something happens, those trigger points can often be.
Yeah.
And I think the work with the clinical psychologists are allowing them to slow down the network's space, think, reflect, which in the curriculum and in a day-to-day school life, bam, 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 we're not taking enough time to breathe and be. And when we talk about staff well-being, it's great that they're giving them like cakes in the staff room. That's not well-being.
No.
Space and time to process is. So I think that's a really important point.
I was just going to say, just to finish very quickly, I won't hit, it's just that I think then it's supporting the parents to actually know how they can actually help their children with the self-regulation. It's not just down to only the teachers. So I work with parents and young people and in the family setting, so that they got the tools as well to help that child know how to emotionally regulate themselves as well, and it's not all left to other people because they're often not got the support. That's
Another great point, and just for people's interest, if you go Googling at some point, if you Google Growing Stronger Liverpool, we've got a public health framework which really works with the public sector, doctors, the police, any adult who work with adults, so children's centre, family hubs, our schools, and the Growing Stronger training and framework gives a model for schools to operate parental groups in a safe way, and the supervision provided with that as well, so that we're trying to hit it from different angles. They're like sister projects developed. Growing Stronger was slightly later than Heart, but they do the same thing. You can match the letters of this framework to the other, if that makes sense. So it's just interesting. Thanks for that point. Anyone else want to offer anything?
Yeah, can I just say, just in terms of common mistakes, I think sometimes we often expect children to talk about their experiences, especially young children. It's not appropriate. and they don't have the language, they don't have the emotional context, their brains haven't developed in order to communicate, and I think that can be hugely damaging. And I think what we need to spend more time focusing on is other methods of communication other than talk therapy, because children need that nurturing support, they need other avenues of release that isn't just talking. And we've become very adult-centric in terms of how we expect children to recover from trauma and to get help from trauma. We don't expect our baby to talk about why they're crying. Why would we expect young children to do the same? So we need to be much more children-focused when it comes to allowing them to release the trauma. And there are many ways, including somatic approaches that help them.
Yoga in schools and things like that. Thanks for that. That's a great point as well. I think obviously there's not time to talk about it. One of our schools really went down the play element, just Suzanne's next, went down the play element, and their project for their first year was all those opportunities the young people had missed. We're going to actually, instead of reducing playtime because incidents happen, because that's what schools do, they extended it. They took curriculum time and they, with their early years staff and a whole inset day, built an entire play curriculum that went right across developmental stages, and the staff basically still get their break time, but it's half, it's like they'll be out for 15 minutes playing with the children, modelling, supporting them with all different things, and then they'll swap. So the staff are still getting that 15-minute, go to the loo, have a drink of water, but the impact of that on language development, regulation, friendships in the school, it literally eradicated so much so quickly. So that was brilliant. Sorry.
No, it's just quickly. Suzanne Parrot, Achieving for Children. We started our attachment journey about 5 years ago. We now have 85% of our schools across 3 local authorities that are attachment aware. There's a year's training. We've got 92 schools on our programme this year, each with their own coach, which we fund as a virtual school. And there's all of this brilliant work. You've heard various virtual schools speaking today. But what I would do a big plea for, in whatever capacity you are here in, is that we need a systemic change. We need this from the top. My schools say to me they feel like positive disruptors, and they ask why they're not getting this lead from a government level. And it is starting to happen, but trauma-informed practice has revolutionised the education system in Scotland. There was one exclusion last year across all of Scotland's schools, and we are a long way still from that. Locally, we've got a narrative change, and that is, again, if there's one thing I can possibly leave with you to go away and have a look into, it's emotion coaching. It's an absolute game changer. I didn't know about it until I started this attachment journey, but it gives a realistic toolkit for every member of our schools. So all those 92 schools, every member of staff, the governors will all get emotion coaching training. And it takes such a pressure off. That moment where you feel you've got to argue with the child, no, you don't. There's a different way. And that, I think, is what's changed the culture in our schools.
Thank you very much. Just the last one here, because we are 3 minutes over and you'll all want a cup of tea and tell me to shut up.
For what it's worth, I'd just like to add that my own experience in school has been nothing but an emotional intelligence tragedy, and so has my 6 children. We all got through it in some way, and most of you will probably say, well, you don't have a mental health problem, you don't have any trauma. Well, I would like to offer to you that if you haven't been a foster child very early in your life, there's plenty of trauma that was inflicted upon you in school. And for the rest of your life, you're trying to deal with it. You are building a harness, you become hardened, you become distant, and all of these little tricks that we're doing 24/7 to somehow fend our way through life. It happens to us in school. And I'm not even blaming the teachers. I would say that what we need is no less but a fundamental change of what school actually means. And that we approach it with the same intelligence, emotional intelligence, that we expect of good fathers and mothers in creating their home and creating the atmosphere at home. One of my children the only girl that we had was so severely bullied in school that at the age of 18, she ended her life, when her damage was inflicted when she was 14 and 15. And I'd just like to add with the reference that her teacher in her class, she developed cancer. And Lisa was already in psychological care for 2 or 3 years. And for some reason, her psychologist, who is supposed to be the best in the county, had the idea that the two should talk with each other, like 3 or 4 years after the fact, and just try to find out what happened, ask each other questions, and maybe there would be a measure of forgiveness. And this psychologist said that was the greatest mistake that she made, because the teacher answered the phone, but she was totally adamant and refused to have a conversation. And 6 months later, Lisa had died. To this day, I don't know how this teacher would continue living with that knowledge. She wouldn't have had to forgive, but at least she could have said in some way, look, we're both humans. And all of the other people that were involved. Suffice it to say that the platform where all of this happened on was school, and supposedly psychologically and intellectually and emotionally well-rounded individuals who decided that they wanted to be teachers.
Go on, Stephen. Thank you.
I wasn't actually going to say anything, but like, he's handed me the mic, hasn't
I thought
he?
you were going to say something, that's why I paused. You have to say something now.
Got to say something now, ain't I? Hello, everyone. I was half thinking about what you were sort of mentioning there about systemic change. Systemic change is 100% something that we require. I'm on the ground every day working with children and young people. I have been for the last 10 years in an educational capacity. When I think about systemic change, I think about the bus stop, and we're waiting for the bus. And I'm at this bus stop, and I'm looking up the road, and I can't see the bus coming. But I've got a choice on whether I walk. So I choose to walk. And I choose to create the change through my organisation elements and through myself on a day-to-day basis. Those changes, they happen through interactions with children and young people. They say that every interaction is an intervention. And we've got a saying within Elements called drip by drip, day by day, and that's something that we apply every single day through every single interaction. We can wait around for the government all day long, and in an ideal world it would change, but we're not in a position where we're waiting around for that long. We've got to do the work. We can't just wait around for it. So when I think about the care system, we have to split those two in half. We've got the system and we've got care. So system, yes, change needs to happen, but we can carry on with the care. We don't have to wait around to change with the care. The care can continue. I can show up every single day. I can be myself. I can be patient. I can be present. I can be curious. I can be creative. I can be authentic. I can be real with you in this moment. I can sit on the curbside in the pouring rain when you're crying your heart out, and I can be there by your side. That's not a governmental shift. That's me choosing to be that person in that moment for who that child needs. Children need systemic change, practitioners need systemic change, but what children need is they need us to be present, they need us to be in the moments with them. That's what they remember, and that's why I'm so passionate about the power of one person. That any single person in this room today can make a significant difference in a child's life at any given moment. Now I'm half thinking that you passed me the mic, and I didn't know what I was going to say.
You wrapped that up nicely for me there, Stephen, though. I think the only thing I'd add to everything you said, the only thing I'd add to everything you said there is probably a quote from Liverpool's most famous care experienced young person, John Lennon: all you need is love. And we can all give that love in lots of different ways to young people. So, you know, that's a real big takeaway. So your last little job, because it is tea break and you're going to have to, like, run sensibly, don't fall over, please. I don't want ambulances and blame. But please, the tree on the left, if you just think about the things you've heard and thought about and reflected on, what is the one thing you could do tomorrow after what you've heard today that could make a change? And if you can write it down, stick it on the tree. Thank you.